Hello, everyone. Thank you, first of all, for joining one more session of Product School today with me. My name is Chowdhury, and I am working as a program manager with Microsoft for the last 5 years now. So, I'd be taking with you this session today. I'd be talking about the overall functionalities of a PM and specifically about how storytelling is so much important in terms of what the PM does in his or her daily life, right? So, yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen and we can get started with this one. And I'm trying to share. Yeah, it's happening now. Fine. Okay, so a little bit about me. So I did my MBA and then joined. And before my MBA, I was working as a developer and with a background in Java, and then worked on specific products. After that, I did my MBA and joined Microsoft in the capacity of a program manager. And over the past 5 years, I have worked with around five different teams across 6 or 7 different products. Some of them were like products which were existing and we had to take it from one level to another. Some of them were completely new products which we launched. So I have had those different varieties of experience of how you have to go ahead and interact with your users, with your stakeholders, and with everyone with whom you're working as a PM in these different parts of the product journey. And in all of them, what I have seen is that storytelling on the way you are conveying whatever point you want to put forward, it makes such a big difference. It kind of is a make or break between ensuring that your product is a success, but versus your product does not reach the levels that you want your product to go ahead and reach. Sorry. So before going into the details of storytelling, probably I thought I'll start off with a little bit about general PM accountabilities. Now, most of you are budding PMs who have already started on this journey of a PM or is planning to start so. So over your next 5 or 6 years, a lot of people will be coming to you and talking about the PM accountabilities that you have to keep in your mind, which is a good thing. Because PM role, according to me, is a very abstract role where there's no defined lines that are drawn that this is actually what you have to do. It kind of moves across all of the different roles that are in the journey as a product. I mean, you sometimes have to take the role of a developer, you have to take the role of a UX designer, you have to take the role of the stakeholder or the CEO of your product, and also you have to take the role of the users who are actually using the product. So I've always thought PM to be like water. I always use this analogy because water, if you put water in whatever container, it takes the shape of that container, which means a PM has to be very, very flexible in his or her approach. While talking to someone, while understanding what their pain points are, what their use cases or requirements are, you have to have a very, very open mind. And having said that, I mean, when there are certain instances where you have to be assertive because you know you have the right data, you know you have the right research to back you up. In those cases, you have to be assertive about the point that you want to put forward and ensure that that's the path that is being followed, like a tidal wave or something. Because the tidal wave waits for no, right? Yeah. So the way you can be assertive without kind of ensuring that there's friction between the group is specifically by storytelling, and that's why I never thought of storytelling as a different a capability or a separate capability within the PM accountabilities, because everyone talks about customer obsession and you have to be customer obsessed, right? You have to understand what your customers want, what they feel, what they desire, and all of those points. Then whatever decisions that you take has to be data driven, because other than data, any point that you put forward is just opinion. So it's your opinion versus someone else's opinion. So you have to ensure that you have data supporting whatever decision that you're taking. Then obviously you have to deliver the outcome. Delivering the outcome is as important as ensuring that people understand that you have delivered the outcome, because I mean, in your mind, you know the whole journey, you have the path set for that particular product, you have the vision and everything. But the person with whom you are talking to might not share the same kind of knowledge that you have of your product, because you are like living, breathing your product day in, day out. But might not be the case with the person with whom you are sharing this particular update. So once you deliver that outcome, once you cross that line, you have to ensure that whoever is kind of waiting to understand what's the current update of that product, they understand that you have actually crossed that particular line. And that's where delivering the outcome and also talking about how the outcome has been delivered is that much important. And the same goes for measuring measure effectively, which is the extension of delivering the outcome, right? Because measuring outcome does not just mean that you are just talking about the data. You have to talk about the data, make no mistake about it. But once you have put the data on the dashboard or on the PPT or wherever you are presenting it, you have to bring out that story or those insights that is coming out of the data. That because we reach from point A to point B, which means that the user behavior has changed for this particular product or this particular domain or this particular industry. Again, that's where the way you are presenting the data becomes that much important. So that's why I feel storytelling is an underlying object that kind of cuts across all of the other PM accountabilities, and you cannot treat storytelling as a separate accountability, which makes it one of the most important accountabilities as a PM. Because if you cannot communicate what you have in your mind or what you have achieved or what you desire to achieve to the people with whom you're working with, because make no mistake, a PM has to work as a team player, and to be a team player, you have to and you have to be the leader of the team, and to be that, you have to be a very good storyteller. Okay, now let's move into a little bit of details of how we want to tell the story. What is the story that we want to tell, and how kind of all of this comes together, ensuring that more often than not, whenever you are going ahead and addressing a group of people with whom you want to collaborate or whom you want to be on the same team for achieving something, they actually see the product or see your ideas the same way that you are doing. So as I said, perspectives differ, obviously, right? And as a PM, you have to work with all of different varieties of people. So you have to work with your UX team, who will be defining or designing the user interface that your product should have. You have to work with the developers who will be doing the actual coding part of your product. And you have to work with the testers who will be kind of testing it out and saying it's okay to go or not. And finally, you have to obviously work with your users to understand, first of all, is their pain point addressed with the solution that we have proposed, and once they're using it, how happy or not happy they are with the product that you have sent out to them. And at the back of all of them, there's always the stakeholder, right, who just wants to understand one thing: what is the impact that you are creating, and what is the dollar conversion of that impact that we are driving home. So once you are talking to all of these different personalities, you have to ensure that you bring out that key differentiating factor, which makes this diverse group of people want to come on board with you, want to partner with you, and essentially share your vision, and think that if we are going down this path that this PM is proposing to us, we will be successful down the line. And for that, two things are required. One is the content of the story, and second is how you are actually going ahead and presenting that story. Now, the content of the story has to be same and has to be a solid core which you have to go ahead and internalize first. If it's a product that you have been working on, I mean, again, let's just step back one bit, and then let's just divide it into two different halves. One is an existing product. If it's an existing product, it's relatively easier for you to go ahead and share all of the things that have already happened with your team, and then take it from point A to point B. But if it's a new product and you're starting from point zero, which is just the whiteboard, then it becomes that much more difficult for you to go ahead and explain and ensure that everyone is on the same page with you. That's where you have to ensure that the story that you are going to present to them, you have internalized that so many times, and this stories, I mean, in such a way that whatever question might come across you, or whatever the expression of the person who's hearing you out, from that you can understand that is that person on board with you, or that person is, or the story is just doing tangential to. Like if I could quote one of I think the CEO of LinkedIn had said this once, like by the time anyone to whom you're telling a story comes on board with you and then starts understanding the story in the same way that you are, you would be hating that story because you would have to repeat the same thing so many times. But that's the hard fact. You have to ensure that you repeat the same thing so many times before the person who's actually hearing this out kind of comes on board and starts thinking in the same direction as you are, because you are the person who has actually created the story and lived the story. Now you have to ensure that the person who has not lived the story is virtually living the story, because until and unless they also start living the story, they also kind of close their eyes and start visualizing the story the way you are, that means that they are not on the same page as you are, and which most of the time leads to failure rather than success. That's the what part of it. I mean, what is it that you are going to say? Now come to the how part of it, which is as important and as essential as the what part. All of the different groups that you'll be talking to are not same, right? And there are different things that drive each of these different groups. And you have to, as a PM, identify what is the key differentiating factor that drives the group that you are currently talking to. So, for example, if it's the UX team or the UX design or the UX lead, then probably creating a awesome out-of-the-box UX, which kind of changes the course of that particular product or that particular discipline that product is something that drives him or her, right? So we have to present the story in such a way that saying that till date, all of the other competitive products that are in the market, or even your product, used to solve a problem from point A to B to C to D. But now with this new idea, you are bypassing, let's just say, one point and taking them from point A to C to D, which means with the new UX that we are proposing, what is happening is that the way the users actually look at the product completely changes, and this kind of a UX is something that is kind of path breaking. That would be something that would definitely ensure that you have got the complete and undivided attention of your UX lead, and he is as keen to get this product out of the way and get this product into the market and make it a successful one as much as you are. The same thing goes for the others as well. I mean, if it's a developer or a developing team, you have to ensure that he or she understands that with this kind of approach that you are saying, you are completely trying out a new architecture, which probably is something that not a lot of people have tried, or probably something that has not been tried before, which brings in that factor of an adventure, that brings in the factor of that newness, which kind of drives this particular team probably. So, and same with the user. I mean, once you're talking to the user, you're going ahead and telling that this is the product that you have released. You have to ensure that you go ahead and sit in the user's shoes and tell them that this is the problem that you are solving. This was the way you were solving it, but I'm probably coming ahead and telling you a completely different way to solve this problem, and the reason I'm telling you is this. And once you give that perspective to the user, most often than not, that user would be inclined to at least get on board with you and try the product once, and then understand how the product actually helps that person. So that's where how you are telling the story matters. That's where the different perspectives matter, and that's where the key differentiating factor that you as a PM have to identify before going ahead and telling a story to your particular audience matters. Moving on. Now let's go into a little bit more details of storytelling, right? So, and this is what that I have understood from my own experience. I mean, they're different, and this is all very abstract and theoretical, right? So different people would have different theories, and this is what I have experienced from my work with all of the different products that I worked with, be it the internal products or external products, be it products that were already there as I mean in production for 5 years, and we had to take it to a completely new platform, or if it's a completely new product that we proposed which was not even there, and the way the problems were being solved before the product we launched was in a different way, and we said no, this is not the way, and we have to launch a completely new product to solve it. In all of these different experiences, I have seen that if you kind of structure the story in this categories, it becomes a lot more easier for you to firstly internalize that story, and then go ahead confidently into a room where your audience is waiting to hear from you, to go ahead and deliver that particular story. So the kind of big buckets that I kind of divide the storytelling is structure, derived from experience, providing relevant and interim data, and finally connect. So now let's get into each of these details. Structure. So structure is obviously one of the most important things, because if you do not have the structure of a particular story, you would be obviously going haphazardly from one place to another. So you have to ensure that you have a structure laid out in your mind when you are going ahead and telling the story to your audience. Now, the structure would be defined by all of these three important poles or points. First is identifying what is your customer is trying to achieve. And that can be divided into short term versus long term, because make no mistake, whenever a customer tells you, they'll just tell you about the immediate problem that they're facing. But that does not mean that that is the ultimate problem that the customer is facing. Sometimes it might happen that there's a problem which is veiled behind the problem that he or she is telling you, which is something that you have to identify and then find out what is the long-term solution, which might mean that you are solving the problem that a customer is telling, or it might mean that you are taking a completely different approach to kind of go ahead and solve the problem that the customer has. And then you have to kind of go ahead and explain the same thing to your team as well as the customer. Let me take an example for this one, because this is very important, because this is the first step which defines how the story kind of goes ahead beyond this point. So we were working on a product where we were told that, so let's just take an example of a company. For a company, if all of the individuals working for the sales department of the company are talking to its customers, they had to put those contacts into the system so that those contacts are maintained as the property of the company. Now, we had to go ahead and ensure that probably the number of contacts that were part of the system was moved from point A to point B. And we had to kind of come up with a way to do that. And that's what we did. We did not look at why people were asking us to do that. Because this was asked, we just went ahead with the how part of it. Is how to move the number of contacts that were in the system, which was A, to B, where B is obviously greater than A. And when we achieved that and we went ahead and showed the results to everyone, the stakeholders, one of them asked me actually, saying that, hey, Rick, I see that you have achieved this goal and everything, which is great and which is awesome. But why did you do it in the first place? I was like, okay. Just took a deep breath and I was taken aback, because at that point I did not have an answer to it. I could not say that because it was just told to me. I mean, that's the worst answer as a PM that you can give. So I kind of went back and then started to study why we wanted to ensure that the number of contacts increased, and then found out the actual reason for ensuring that the number of contacts increased, because there are a lot of activities that the sellers were doing which they could not have done if the contacts were not in the system. And just putting the contacts into the system did not help the sellers. We had to ensure that we present the contacts in such a way which would solve the problem for the sellers. So the final problem was essentially ensuring that the selling community that the company had, their lives would be easier so that they could increase the number of sales that they were doing initially. And we were just presented with a part of the problem, and we did not look at the long-term solution or the long-term approach towards this, and we just went ahead with the short-term approach and tried to solve it. So always keep that in mind while you are trying to solve something, that whatever the problem that is presented to you at the face value, is that the ultimate problem that you should solve, or is there something that is kind of veiled behind that face value problem, which you need to identify and then see if solving that makes more impact. Once that is done, the process becomes very, very important, because you might have thought about the whole product. You might have thought about the whole product journey, like from point A and go to point Z through A, B, C, D, E, and whatnot, right? But the person with whom you are talking to might not have that same idea or that same sense of knowledge that you have, because you are the person who's actually drawing it out. So your UX team might not know it. Your stakeholders might not know it. Probably your group of users with whom probably you go ahead and test out your product, they might not know it. So it becomes that much important for you to become transparent about the process or the journey that you are going to cover when starting from point A and going towards point B. So if you could ensure that you are breaking down the whole process in such a way that everyone to whom that you are explaining understands the journey, then they will have that confidence in you, thinking that, okay, now I have a clear vision of how we are moving from the identifying the problem to actually finding the solution and releasing this product out in the market. And I have enough confidence with my PM to ensure that, yes, this will be a successful deploy. So that's where explaining the process becomes that much important, because you might be aware of the process, you might be confident of the process, but that does not mean that the person who will be starting to work with you or starting to partner with you on this will be sharing the same level of confidence until you share the entire process with that person. And finally, talk about the price. You always have to talk about the price, because that's what makes the whole thing interesting, right? I mean, if you go ahead and tell that just do this, I mean, we need to do this, people will understand and they'll say, yeah, we'll do it, but why do you want to do it? So you'll always have to show the price that you are striving towards to achieve at the end of the whole process. And this goes true for everyone in the team. I mean, you have to share this with your UX team, with your developers, with your stakeholders, managers, everyone. Because if everyone does not have an eye on the prize, they're bound to kind of get lost in the way. And especially if it's a long drawn process, if it's a long roadmap, then definitely they'll lose motivation and everything if they do not have the eye on the prize, which should be eye catching one and which should be a tangible one. Now that we have kind of went ahead and described how the structure of your story should be, now let's see that how you can make the presentation of the story that much more impactful and that much more eye-catching. This is again something that I'm talking from experience, which is that you should derive from experience, right? Because that I've seen in the past, and this especially holds true if it's a new product or it's a new journey, and probably you are revamping something completely. Until and unless you draw something from your past experience or something from experience that someone else has went ahead and achieved or gone through or has failed probably, people do not connect with you at that level. I mean, if you just go ahead and talk about the theoretical part of it, people will understand, but probably that will leave their mind as soon as you leave the room, or at least 50% of it will leave their mind as soon as you leave the room. So to ensure that whatever you have discussed or whatever you have talked to your team or the person whom you want to kind of have this knowledge sticking to them, because this will be important for them to partner with you during the journey, you have to ensure that you drive home the point with one or more examples, so that if not anything, at least those examples will stick to them. Let me just give an example to drive my point home. So we were, in one of the products that I was working as a PM, we wanted to change the complete UX or the user interface for it. So because we saw that even after providing good features and everything, the interface wasn't interesting enough for people to come around and use it, because they had so many other options. And though they are doing their everyday job and that's not something for their entertainment, but they still wanted some kind of an interest element associated with the particular UX. So when I went ahead and explained the same thing to the UX lead, he said, yeah, this is fine and everything, and I'm on board it and fine. But next day I got a call from my senior manager asking me to come to his room. When I went, he said, Rick, I think you had a discussion with your UX team, but it seems that he's or the UX manager is not very confident on the approach that you are taking. I said, okay, but why is that? Because I explained everything. I explained the data points, I explained the theory, I explained the structure, sorry, not the structure, the process or the path, and I explained the price also. So what's the problem? So he said probably this is something that is new to him, because he has not done something like this in the past. So it will help if you could give an example. Then that got me thinking, and I came back and thought about my previous experiences that I had with similar kind of a product. I mean, before joining the particular company that I'm talking about, when I worked with my previous company, I was working on a similar product. So I went ahead and took that example and said that, hey, let's have one more discussion, because probably there was one point I forgot to mention to you. And this was like, I had the similar kind of experience in my previous company, where we had built a product which kind of did the same kind of functions which we want our product to go ahead and perform. And we had this UX which got the job done, but did not have the interesting factor or the interesting element associated with it. And that's where we did not see the customers actually kind of getting too much hooked onto that particular product. And that's when we changed the UX from this to this, which ensured that the not only the existing users got a lot more interest in the product, they also brought new products, and the word of mouth marketing was excellent or out of the roof for that product. So and I shared some snapshots of that particular real life example rather than just drawing something out of theory. So that got my UX lead driving, and he said, okay, we have to go ahead and do this. We have to do this better than what you have done in your previous company, and we have to ensure that we kind of break all expectations. And I could see that energy, I could see that zeal in their eye, and I could see that in his eye. So that's where I feel like if you have an example, and not necessarily you have to have an example from your past experience, which is the best, but if you do not have it, if you could draw some experience from something that has already happened out there in the world and that fits your particular use case, that will be awesome. Now obviously you have to include your target audience. I mean, I mean, that goes without saying, right? I mean, if you're just saying something where that person does not feel included in the journey, I mean, if you're talking about the journey where you do not explicitly bring this out, that this is the part that you play in the journey, I don't think he or she will kind of get so much interested into your product. I mean, this is something implicitly people understand and know, but still calling it out doesn't harm. But it actually helps to ensure that people who are going on this journey with you are on board with you for this particular thing. So always ensure that you are including your target audience. And target audience does not always mean user, it means the person with whom you're working also. Okay, providing data. This is also, I think this is also one of the most important parts of our storytelling. And it can be again divided into two parts. One is giving interim reports and then projecting key results. Giving interim reports is essentially when you are working on an already existing product, when you have some past results to view and then you can compare and show that these are the results that we achieved before we are planning to do this. And once we go ahead and achieve this, this is how we think the model will change. So, but providing that is very important, because unless, I mean, at short intervals, you're not showing the data of what you're building, that kind of reduces the, I mean, the enthusiasm with people would have started, that would slightly go ahead and dip. So to ensure that as a PM, you have to ensure that energy does not dip. And how do you do that? Is that by providing the right set of data in the right way. You have to keep on feeding the whole team some interim data points, saying that I did a user research with 10 users with this new plan or with this new capability that we have developed, and people are like very excited about it, or they're not excited about it, and they want these changes and everything. Essentially, you have to keep them in the loop with real-time data. This becomes a lot more difficult if it's a new product, because again, you're starting from scratch. You do not have the data at your disposal. So what you have to do is you have to create those projections. I mean, I'm sure you would have your key results and objectives and everything, but you have to ensure that you're not giving them bad data, but at the same time, you're giving them realistic projections that if we are if we are kind of moving from point A to point B, this is what we predict. From point B to point C, this is what we predict. And finally, when we reach our ultimate goal, this is what we predict. And the data can be as simple as possible. It does not have to be like very well written and big or complex Power BI dashboards or Excel charts or anything. It can be very simple projections of the number of active users that you feel or that you project that increases from point A to point B if you deliver what we have started to deliver. And for that, whatever background work that you need to do in terms of real life researching or going through some industrial reports or going through the data or ensuring that you have added the right telemetry, you have to go ahead and ensure that those things are done. Because until the data is in place, you cannot create the data into a story and you cannot go ahead and present the story to your users. Now, the last point, and if you guys have been listening to me carefully, you'd know the last point is connect. But instead of moving forward, let me take a step backwards or 2 steps backwards. Like storytelling is to the entire PM accountability, according to me, connect is to storytelling. So connect is something that you cannot kind of keep separate as a separate pillar, which comes within the facets of storytelling. Connect is something that is on the background of storytelling. So if you do not connect with your users at any of the levels, when you're creating the structure, when you're trying to derive something from your experience, or when you're providing data, you have to always keep in mind that whatever you are doing or whatever you're showing or whatever you're telling, you have to connect to your audience. And you as a PM has to be the best judge, and you have to be confident about your judgment that if I go ahead and present this kind of data, if I go ahead and present in this kind of a structure, or if I derive these examples from the industry or from my past experience, this will ensure that I have the maximum connect with the room. Because if you lose the connect at one point in time, post that whatever you go ahead and say is something that is like just sharing the empty room, because no one would be listening. Because once people lose connect, it's very difficult for you to get that connect back to you. So again, just reiterating this point again, because this is something that I want you to take away from this particular slide. What storytelling is to PM accountabilities, connect is to storytelling. And as long as you remember this, I think you'd be really good in what kind of stories you would be going ahead and saying. So that was about it in terms of storytelling. Be ensured that you try to follow whatever we have discussed today or whatever I've said today in terms of ensuring that whatever steps as a PM that you are going ahead and taking, ensure that there is a story associated with it, and ensure that that story gets carried over to the person who's sitting in front of you, sitting in that room, or sitting in anywhere, virtually or in your physical presence or whatever that is. You have to ensure that whatever points that you want to drive home is driven home through a proper, well structured, well thought out story, because that way the connect that you establish with your team, that connect is a long term connect, and that ensures that from the starting point to the point where you actually go ahead and deliver that product into the market, your team is right with you, right behind you, and they ensure that this is as much as their accountability as it is yours to make that product a successful one. With that, I'd end today's session. Thank you so much for joining. I'm available on LinkedIn if you guys want to reach out to me with any questions or any suggestions. I'd be happy to hear them out, because make no mistake, I'm also learning every day in this job. I'm also trying to ensure that whatever stories that I'm creating or I'm building, they are also much more better than what stories I told yesterday, so that going forward we all have one motive, right? Ensure that we are successful in what we are doing, and we love what we are doing, because this is a fantastic discipline. But unless you take interest in each and every facet of this, I mean you would not understand the fascinating thing that PM is. So with that, I'll end this sharing and I'll end this. Thank you so much for joining today.